Tyler, I'm so excited to talk to you tonight. How are you?
I'm great. It's so good to talk with you also.
Well, we met I guess we kind of virtually met on another podcast, and I was so excited to meet a male in the tidying and organizing space. So, why don't we start there? Tell us who you are, what you do, and how you found yourself as a tidying influencer.
Yeah, so I am Tyler Moore. I live with my wife and three daughters in New York City. We live in a 750 square foot railroad style apartment. And in many ways, we've been forced to confront the brutal reality of what it's like to live in a super small space with three kids who have growing and ever evolving needs. And when I say that we're forced to confront our space, like we have a very limited amount of closet space and storage space. We don't have an attic, we don't have a basement, we can't build onto our apartment. So we have a very fixed amount of space. And so my wife and I have had to think strategically about how we're going to use every square inch in order to best meet the needs of our family. And so I found myself in this tidying space because one, there aren't many male perspectives out there on what it looks like to tidy and organize and clean and help to maintain systems within a home. And so I thought it was really important to share not only my journey, but my wife's journey of how we're making this small space work, but telling the story through my perspective has really been an enjoyable and in many ways a cathartic process. And as I'm called on Instagram, I am Tidy Dad. And for me, as it is for many people, the tidying journey really exists on a lot of different levels, which I know we'll get into. That there is the physical tidying of a space, but then there's also the tangible tidying of our mental health and some of just the clutter that fills our minds and how we allocate time and resources in our given day. And so Tidy Dad does exist on a couple different levels. I am a dad who enjoys tidying physical spaces, but I'm also a dad who's been on a journey to tidy up my life in other ways too.
Mhm. I love that. I have to ask though, what came first? The small apartment? Like, did the small apartment force you to get tidy, or have you always just been a tidy, organizing type of person, and the smaller sized apartment didn't, weigh in on at all?
Yeah, I always had a natural inclination towards keeping my things tidy. I mean, even as a kid, I remember taking so much pride in like opening my dresser drawers and knowing where everything was. And, having a sense that when I walked into my room, everything was sort of in order. And that came from I'm a middle child, I have an older sister and a younger sister. And so that feeling of, just like control over my physical space was always something that I really cherished. Um, my wife and I, we've been married for 13 years now. We've always lived in small spaces. And one was just economically, like when we were starting out and we were very young, we were both in grad school. We were very frugal with our money and wanted to steward our resources as best as possible. So we naturally gravitated towards small spaces. And then obviously, when we moved to New York City, um, small spaces are the norm here. Um, and then as our girls have gotten older, as they've gotten larger, as they take up more real estate in our apartment, that has really pushed our thinking on how do we keep things tidy? How do we develop systems? Because it's not as easy as it once was when it was just two of us. Now we have five people with ever growing wants and needs. And so thinking about how we can maintain order, there are times when it is a challenge, but it's something that I've always enjoyed and gravitated towards was sort of problem solving and figuring out how to best utilize space. I'm also a teacher. I teach seventh grade here in New York City. I have 31 students in my class. So when you think about 31 seventh graders in a classroom, some similar principles apply, that there is a limited amount of space. At the end of the day, there is just security that kids get in knowing where their things are and how they can access the things that they need at any given time. And so there's so many parallels between teaching and home that we're really forced to confront systems and how we're going to design things and how we're going to make things work, in order to give that like security and safety, and just meet the basic needs of our daughters.
Hmm. I love that parallel to teaching. I've mentioned to my listeners many, many, many times that I used to be a teacher. I used to teach eighth grade ELA. And so, yeah, so tidy dad, mama minimalist, like we were destined to meet. But yeah, there's something to be said about routines and space within the classroom. And I definitely see that translating into the home as well. And what I love about your story is that, let me say that again because my voice squeaked in a really weird way. And what I love about your story is that you're kind of pushing back against what many families do when the family gets larger, the children get bigger, which is, of course, to move to a bigger space, A, or add an addition, B. I can't tell you how many times a day I hear um, friends, acquaintances, people at the supermarket saying, like, we're out of space, we're either moving or adding an addition. And I'm always thinking to myself as a minimalist, well, why not, instead of taking this big financial leap, stress inducing leap of moving or adding an addition, why don't we start first by like focusing on the way things are running in the house? So that's just a thought there. But we're here today to talk about just enough living. And I guess we should start talking about just enough living by me asking you, well, what on earth is just enough to you?
Yeah, so just enough to me, where I really came to this realization that I wasn't pursuing just enough and I was pursuing more, really came as a result of like my personal tidying journey in our home. So I was one of those people that for years followed this super straight lined trajectory. I was the kid that checked off all the boxes as I was moving through middle school and high school. As I transitioned into college and then into graduate school, I did everything that I thought everyone expected of me. That then that mentality then continued into my career. I started as a teacher, and then, as you know, you are in the teaching profession for a few years, and the questions become, well, when are you going to move into school administration? When are you going to move out of the classroom? When are you going to pursue that next thing? And so when I started feeling those grumblings, or hearing those sort of grumblings from people, I decided, let's do it. Let's move into school administration. And so I took a job that it did pay more, but with the more pay came more hours, more responsibility. And what I found was that that pursuit of more professionally actually took me away from the things that really mattered most. And the result of that sort of pursuing that very linear career path and wanting to pursue things that I thought would raise my sort of like esteem in the eyes of others, was that I was left like mentally, emotionally completely broken. And so um, in my early 30s, had to take, I took leave from my job. I had to take a step back. It was when my second daughter was about 9 months old. And I was like, I need to step back and just reevaluate. Why am I pursuing all of the things that I am? My wife and I, we started tidying our physical space as a result of that, really focusing on, we now have these two girls in this small space. And I'm sure you're familiar with Marie Kondo's book, The Magical Art of Tidying Up. But she has this section in the back where she talks about how a lot of the people who complete their tidying journeys with their physical possessions come to these realizations. And I was very cynical when I started, and I was like, I don't know what she's talking about. What is this realization? And as we finished sort of our tidying journey and bringing order to things and simplifying our lives, I got to the end, and one day I turned to my wife and I was like, I am done being a school administrator. I do not like this job. It is actually taking me away from all of the things that I actually want to be doing and find important. This pursuit of more money, more positional power, where is it actually taking me? It's actually taking me away from things that matter. And that's when this idea of just enough came to mind, because we had this conversation of what would it look like to really live with just enough. We don't there is this pursuit of more that actually leaves you feeling more depleted in so many ways. And so for us, just enough, just enough right now for me as a dad, teaching is a great profession. It provides well for us monetarily. I'm able to have time off with my kids. I'm able to largely do my best during the day to work and then come home and not have all of the additional responsibilities because those aren't necessarily expected of me. But I've really had to quiet the back of my head, which is telling me more, 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 more. You need a bigger space. You need more physical possessions. You need more positional power at work. And calming myself and saying, you know what, right now, what I have is truly just enough for my little growing family. That doesn't mean that I might not pursue opportunities as they come in the future, but it's being very present to not be on that hamster wheel that we can sometimes get on and feel like we have to just continue to pursue more and more and more. It's okay to stop and say, you know what, I have just enough right now, and I can just take a pause and not feel like I have to pursue more and more and more.
Mhm. That speaks to my soul. I You mentioned how the pursuit of more really left you completely exhausted, emotionally depleted. And I would just say to that that yes, when we're always searching for the next big thing, trying to grab the next golden ring, that takes an awful lot of energy, right? So it would be no surprise then that you're just feeling exhausted. Um, but I do have to ask you, you mentioned the voice in the back of your head that's always saying more, more, more. I think we all have that voice to some extent. The voice is louder in some of our heads than others, but how do you quiet that voice?
So I think I've really tried to work on being present in the moment and appreciating just those simple, joyful aspects of life. And one of the things that I'm really enjoying now is my oldest daughter goes to school at the same school where I teach. And so I remember it was a couple weeks into the school year. I had just this overwhelming feeling of joy as I left my classroom, walked outside. She's in the next building over, picked her up from school. She put on her helmet, she put on her scooter, or she got on her scooter, and we just scootered away. And I realized I don't have any professional teaching responsibilities for the rest of the evening until I return to school the next day. And there was this overwhelming sense of joy of the pain that I experienced years ago, that realization that I came to that professionally I was feeling depleted and making the difficult decision to return to teaching. I'm actually now paying the dividends of that decision. And so oftentimes it's just in those simple moments that we have to remind ourselves to be present and just to enjoy the happiness that does come from that freedom of recognizing that I don't have to pursue more. I don't have to do what my neighbors are doing or what my friends are doing. I don't need those accomplishments because right now, being able to just walk my daughter to and from school is one of the most joyful parts of my day. And I know that that would not be possible if I were continuing to be a school administrator. There's no way that you can leave when your contract hours are over. You can't just, pick up your bag and walk out because there's so many needs that people have of you. So I feel like it's just recognizing those small, bite-sized, simple, joyful moments of life that just remind me of that lesson of what it's like to have just enough.
Mm. Your answer there makes me wonder whether the more voice that we all have in the back of our heads, whether that's actually our own voice or whether that's societal norms saying, nope, you can't be content because it's human nature. It's natural to compete and to try and grab that next golden ring, right? And so perhaps finding what is just enough for you versus what's just enough for me comes down to listening to our voice as opposed to those culturally ingrained norms that we tend to, or at least I tend to absorb unconsciously, unintentionally. What benefits have you seen? I know you've already touched on a couple, being able to enjoy the moment, not no longer being mentally, emotionally, physically depleted, but are there any other benefits you have experienced by focusing on your just enough as opposed to the next big thing?
Yeah, so I think that those benefits that you mentioned um, are important, but I also think that another benefit to living in this state of like just enough is that you are giving yourself a little bit of margin in order for the serendipitous things that can sometimes happen in life to just sort of manifest themselves. And so one of the things that as I was like sort of ending the physical tidying journey of our space, I had decided to go back to teaching. Was actually sat down and wrote out um, a bucket list that you could call it, which was like, what are these actual, like, not just goals, but like joy filled, like life experiences that I want to have that aren't just related to career, that aren't related to external affirmation. And one of the things that my wife and I actually put on our list as we were brainstorming together was this dream of like owning a little cottage somewhere outside of the city. As you know, or may not know, but New York real estate is crazy. You know, the amount of money that you have, everybody is always left very unsatisfied with what they can buy. And one of our pursuits in the city was this was when my first daughter was born. There are all of these things that you feel like you have to check off when you're a parent. And one of those big things is home ownership. And we were like, okay, we have our first daughter, like it's time for us to buy an apartment. And so, even for us small space dwellers, the only thing that we could really find was a very overpriced, tiny one bedroom apartment. And we were like, how in the world do we do this? We put an offer down on the apartment. And it was one of those times where I didn't sleep for like days. And if you're not sleeping based on making a decision, oftentimes that tells you like it's the wrong decision. So we ended up, the offer was accepted, but I was like, I can't do this. So we actually pulled out, we retracted our offer, and we just sat and we waited for several years. Um, and when I say the bucket list, like on our list was like, what would it look like for us to have a little retreat space for ourselves away from the city where we can use a little nest egg of money that we had saved. And we sat on that for a while. I was still working as a school administrator, but the other gift of returning to teaching was the gift of summers. And I can't underestimate the gift that summers are. Um, and to know that I had a completely work free summer was just a gift that you can put no monetary value on. And so, because of that, like margin and space that had been created, we were able to dream a little bit. And so we found the gem of a little cottage in very rural Pennsylvania. We decided to put an offer on it. It was accepted. Um, and we've been able to turn that into our little like retreat space for our family. That again, that never probably would have materialized if we had remained on that track that we were on. And it was several years between me deciding to step down from school administration before I was able to actualize that dream of like owning a little space outside of the city. But when you were talking about that like quieting of that voice in your head, that's what I've had to learn to do, because there's so many messages, as you were talking about, that we're fed about you need to have the bigger space, you need to have more, more, more.
Yeah, it's almost as though decluttering is really just a metaphor for becoming intentional in all aspects, right? Like when you decide which sweaters, I'm wearing a sweater, so we'll use that example. Like when you decide which sweaters you're going to keep versus which ones you're going to let go, it's very similar to deciding which obligations you're going to say yes to versus the ones you're going to say no to. There's a lot of power in saying no. That's saying no is an action, where as opposed to like it's active as opposed to being passive and just letting the closet fill with sweaters or letting the schedule fill with stuff that doesn't serve you. And so I really need to think on that. That's profound. Maybe it's just me at 8:30 at p.m., but I feel like
It does. And I think that it's being attuned, and I learned this, and this goes to it goes back to the fundamentals of like organizing your space. Like when you think about tidying your closet and choosing for yourself like what items you want to keep versus what items you want to move out. That idea of honing your decision making process is something that the tidying process taught me, and it relates to exactly what you're talking about. It's being very tuned into yourself as to why you're saying yes to the things that you are, but then trusting and believing in the power of saying no. And it's really leaning into like, why are you saying no? Whether it be business opportunities, whether it be deciding to keep something in your house or not, whether it's deciding like whether you're going to overschedule yourself or your kids, or just say no to the constant sort of stream of information coming in. I feel like the more we say, the more we allow ourselves to say no, but then step back and process, why did I just say no there? That's where the true power is. And so that's something that I am constantly learning. And as I grow and evolve, and even thinking about with my girls, as because they're not hardwired to be minimalists at all. They are hardwired to see and consume and want. Um, but it's like tangibly teaching them why I say no, why we don't always bring new things into our home, how we say goodbye to the toys that we're no longer playing with or are no longer serving us. I do feel like that decision making process is so incredibly important.
well, for any listeners who want to find their just enough, what would you say is their step one?
So for me, um, I think step one is being able to name what's really important for you. And so before even starting the tidying journey, one of the things that I love to talk to people about is just what is like the vision that you have for your home or your space, or the feeling that you want to have. And that idea of casting a vision or having a feeling about a space can also be applied to other aspects of your life. If you can really name what's important to you, you can then start to break down what might be getting in the way of that. And for example, the tangible example is like my job as a school administrator. What was really important to me is, honestly, from my profession, is to be able to provide for my family, to have joy at work, like to look forward to going to work every day. And I did not want to feel the Sunday blues. Having the Sunday blues was something that I never wanted to experience again. And so I then made a list of the types of work that I enjoyed and the types of work that I didn't. And the majority of the work that I did not enjoy fell into the bucket of school administrator. And all of the things that I loved about being in a school fell into that category of being a teacher. And so that's what clarified things for me, was being able to name what truly is important. What is that vision of what it is that I want from whatever it may be? And then start to tangibly name some of what I just mentioned, of whether it be types of work, things that you enjoy doing, but just giving yourself that space to process, I think, is really important.
Yes. I know that in practice, it can be really hard to live an intentional life every single day. But what I love about your response there is that it is as simple as identifying what's important and then setting up your priorities so that what's important gets the lion's share of your attention. So I love that. Tell my listeners where they can find you and your amazing Instagram reels and your blog online.
Yeah, so you can find me on Instagram at tidydad, and then you can find me online at thetidydad.com.
Well, I will link to all of you in this week's show notes. But Tyler, I just want to thank you so much for coming on. I am yeah, I'm so thrilled to be able to just, have this conversation with you at 8:30 at night. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for having me.